the blessing in the breaking. A colleague from an earlier generation, Elizabeth Tarbox, has a story she tells which she calls the teaching bean. When she was a child, her stepmother gave a lima bean to her and to her sister. And she showed the girls how to set the bean in the wet blotting paper, how to set the paper in the jar, and how to set the jar on the windowsill in the sun. And she told them to watch the bean over the next days and weeks. A little later that morning, Elizabeth Tarbucks snuck back up to the window, removed her bean, and polished it up with a bit of furniture polish. Then she put it back in the jar and she writes, "It was all shiny now and smelled much better than my sister's bean." Over the following weeks, Elizabeth witnessed her sister's bean swell and send out a white root, followed by a sweet green shoot arching up out of the jar. And soon her sister's jar was just a mess of roots and shoots, and the bean was ready to be planted. Meanwhile, her own bean did very little beyond getting a little wrinkly, eventually shriveling up to fall at the bottom of the jar. After a while, she threw it away. Reflecting on this experience, Elizabeth Tarbox writes, "How often have I covered things with furniture polish to make them shiny, to make them smell better? How often in my life have I cared more about the way things looked and how they smelled, rather than how they really were? I spent half a lifetime covering my feelings with the emotional equivalent of furniture polish, thinking that if I looked good and smelled good, the ache inside would go away." I know something about that ache. I am familiar with this urge to cover up and hide the messy parts of my life. But real life is messy and a little smelly. It's okay. In fact, it's better when we let it be a little messy and a little smelly. It's worth it. Because amazing things can arise from places in our lives that are a little messy and flawed and broken. Elizabeth's bean remained perfect and pretty until it shriveled up and fell to the bottom of the jar. But her sister's bean smelled bad. Her sister's bean broke. It formed a crack, and a small tendril of life emerged. But like Elizabeth Tarbox, many of us were trained by our society to try to be perfect, to pretend to have no flaws, to fit in, or at least to stand out in only the most accepted and perfect ways. We have not been enculturated to honor our cracks and breaks, our failures and mistakes. The lesson in the Japanese bowl song by Peter Mayer is a wisdom that we usually stumble onto later in life. Too often we have to unlearn the dream that we were fed, that a good life, a happy life, involves the image of perfection. Too many of us grew up trying to be perfect. Well, our neglected, messy spirits were left to shrivel up and fall to the bottom of the jar. But fear not. Unlike a shriveled bean, a shriveled spirit is not beyond salvage. Elizabeth Tarbox continues her ruminations on the lessons she learned from the bean. She writes, "Our spirits are not like beans, thank God. They may shrivel with neglect, but as long as life persists, there is a chance to wash off the polish and redeem the growing thing inside. A chance, she says. There's always a chance to redeem your spirit, to break open anyway. Today, let us give thanks for the ways our broken hearts and broken spirits have held unexpected blessings for us, openings through which life and light may find its way. Carol Makota, her piece that we had in the readings about listening, reminds me of what Elizabeth Tarbox's being was teaching her. Makota urges us to listen. She says, you might hear its message meant for you about being brave, about breaking off the coating applied over the years for protection. And we can do the hard work of peeling back the layers of the polish, of the shielding, that we may then uncover our broken hearts once more. Many of us have tried to be successful, accomplished, cool, independent, self-sufficient, and on occasion, perfect. We thought it would make us happy, or it would at least make other people think good things about us. But perfection is a trap. It tempts us with the self-destructive belief that if we just try harder and become better, we will be able to avoid the painful experiences of shame and failure. And worse, when we are unable to be perfect, we mask our imperfection rather than embrace it. We hide and cover up, lie and deny the messy truth about who we really are. I suppose there are people in the world who do not learn from their mistakes. People are messy and complicated beings. Some people can't see their faults and their flaws, and thus never work to overcome them. They never admit to being wrong or needing help, and they end up living small and limited lives. Perfection is destructive. Embrace your mistakes and flaws, your beautiful brokenness. It will set you free. In his song Anthem by Leonard Cohen, you knew I was going to quote this, didn't you? In his song Anthem, Leonard Cohen calls us to ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So go ahead and be broken. It won't make you feel better necessarily, but it will set you free. Being broken doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It means you're able to grow. The bean that breaks, that splits open, is able to send out the roots and the tendrils of life. It's able to grow. That is the blessing that can be found in the breaking. There is a secret power that can only be found in failing or in falling apart. From there, a new thing can arise. You can arise. A deeper, truer aspect of yourself may emerge from the broken mess, because that's what life does. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out and start breaking things or aim to fail. I'm not encouraging you to stop trying to be better people or to stop working hard for something worthy of our effort. All I'm saying is do not despair for the mess we are in. Part of the brokenness is what we can follow. Part of the brokenness is the blessing that can be uncovered as well. The brokenness is not the important part of the whole thing. our response is. And I'm not trying to say that we can just slap a silver lining on everything. What I'm saying is that we should not pretend the storm clouds are not storm clouds, because in seeing them for what they truly are, we can look past them to what truly matters. What I'm saying is we do better when we speak the truth of our situation rather than pretend all is well. From the truth, the messy, uncomfortable, sometimes painful truth, there is then room for growth and forward movement. By acknowledging the brokenness, by incorporating it into our identity and our story that we tell about ourselves, we shift the story from the brokenness to the ways in which we have overcome the brokenness, to the blessing that arose from inside the crack, to whatever comes next in the story. I have spent more time, more pulpit time this election cycle on the dire concern I have for our continued democracy than I usually do. I generally am not a very political preacher, but we are living in a distressing time, and there is much that has been broken in our civil society. What I am striving to do is speak the truth, to not hide or conceal or pretend the problems away. Instead, I long to declare with L.R. Nost that we ought not to be despaired or dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, and all things can be mended. And so it may be with your heart or your spirit or whatever that being from the story would mean for you. It is broken, but there is still a way to mend it. Mending is what we do. Our children's story today was a version of the concept of creation in Jewish mysticism, tikkun olam. God's love is shattered into countless pieces and scattered across creation. Our job as co-creators is to keep bringing the pieces together, to gather in the shattered bits of love. The next time it feels like something bad has happened, or something precious to you has broken, try this. Grieve. Grieve with all your heart. Feel the loss. Don't pretend it didn't happen or it didn't matter. Grieve and speak the truth of what it was, what the failure or the fracture has meant to you, to us. Then watch. Watch that beam. Healing doesn't just automatically happen. Yes, it is a natural process in us. We do heal, but it's not always automatic. As others have said, time does not heal all wounds. Love can heal most of them over time. But that will always be a messy and complicated love. So it won't ever heal perfectly. What I suggest you watch for in the midst of your brokenness is the unexpected opening for life that can appear. It is not going to appear if you polish your being to pretend it can look and smell better than it really does. But it will appear if you step back and let the messy failures be what they are. And remember, the happy ending may come, but it won't be perfect. The blessing that may come won't fit you and your hoped for life in the most wonderful way. Consider this pandemic. This has been a hard time. People have died and people are suffering. And there is much for me to get angry about. The truth is important here. Grieving what has been lost is important here. But our response to it all is where the blessing will be found. Our response has been to learn new ways to help each other, new ways to keep contact, new life-giving meaning that we find emerging now that would not have emerged in this way without this great fracture in our lives. And we, unlike Elizabeth's lima bean, can always have that polish washed off. Our spirits, thankfully, are always ready to thrust out that thin tendril of life. We, blessedly, can and do heal from the fractures and mistakes of our days. Perfection has not yet ruined us. We can still reach for the bright, lasting light. Gather in another piece. Bring ourselves and our world a little closer to wholeness, one piece at a time. Have you found any pieces today? In a world without end, may it be so.